Hey everybody.
Hey everybody. We've got everybody joining us now. We are glad you guys could join us today. We are doing the final session of the day, and we are talking about Infopath, forms, the future of forms, and what is going on. So what I thought we could do is just a quick round of introductions for everybody, and then I'll kind of get the panel started. And as always, this is a panel, so feel free to put your questions in the box for us. So my name is Jennifer Mason. I am a SharePoint Server MVP. I build out-of-the-box solutions. So I'd like to tell people that I'm allergic to semicolons and syntax. So anything you can do with SharePoint out of the box, which includes Infopath, SharePoint Designer, the browser, product clients, different things like that. So it's kind of my cup of tea and what I specialize in. So I have a lot to say about Infopath and forms and how we do things, as does everyone else on our panel. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it around. Mark Reckley, why don't we start with you guys? Mark wasn't able to join us by video today, but he should be on through voice. So maybe, Mark, you can do your intro for us.
Hey guys, how's it going? So, as Jennifer said, I am Mark Rackley. I've been doing SharePoint development and solutions architecture since 2007. I've been doing a lot of work in forms since that time, mostly on the client side. I've worked in Infopath. I hate Infopath with a passion. I hate it so much I developed a different product instead of Infopath. So yeah, I have a lot of opinions when it comes to forms in SharePoint. So I'll be giving those.
Awesome, awesome. Why don't you give us a quick intro?
All right. Well, I'm the opposite. I still love Infopath for what it is. Okay, so here's a little background on forms and Infopath and me. I've been with Infopath since 2003. We go way back. And 2003 was when it first came out, Infopath 2003, and nobody really knew what to do with it. Then we found the forms library in SharePoint and knew what to do, in 2007, etc. But for a long time, people just did not know exactly what good is it, what should we really use it for on a online basis. So not just Infopath to Infopath, but Infopath in SharePoint. I've written curriculum about it. I've written many articles about it. I've even written a few chapters about Infopath. Currently, things are changing in the whole forms world, and I do want to talk more about it from my own understanding. I want everybody to understand also that the future is not bleak. It's just you have to understand the present and prepare for the future. There are reasons for what's happening, and I'll talk about it from at least my point of view, and we'll go from there.
All right, Dan and then Mark.
Hi, Jen. Hey,
That must be
my
me.
I'm home.
Well, sorry. Go. Sorry, Dan. I heard it wrong. So anyway, I'm Mark Anderson. I'm a SharePoint consulting kind of guy in Boston. SharePoint MVP. SharePoint this, SharePoint that is pretty much all I do. My kid thinks that that's the only word I know. I'm not for or against Infopath or Form 7 or whatever. I think it's very important that we figure out what our requirements are and make sure we use a tool that's going to satisfy those requirements. And I think the whole word forms is a bit of an anathema. I think people sort of hide a lot of things behind that word and they're not really saying what they mean. So hopefully we can get to some of the roots of all of that as we're chatting today.
Great,
There's no room for that
great
attitude
answer,
here, Mark.
I second everything Mark said. My name is Dan Holm. I'm the co-founder of IT Unity, and I've been an IT consultant for almost 20 years now. My perspective coming into this is really helping organizations make smart decisions about a journey in a workload like forms and the things associated with forms. So looking at how far you can get with a specific tool and then where you really need to start investing in other tools to help you go the distance.
Awesome. Well, thanks for the intros, everybody. I thought what we could start out with first was I would do just a quick update on the Microsoft story for forms, and then we can talk about what that means. And so it's going on a year and a half ago, I think now, back at SPC 14, the last one, where Microsoft, declared the death of Infopath, where they said Infopath will be no more. And instead, we are going to come out with these great new things. And so one of them was going to be forms over SharePoint list, and then there was going to be this new tool, and then there was going to be some Word forms and different things like that. And there was a super awesome story. Fast forward to about a year later, and they said, never mind. That's not really what happened. What happened in the back end is that they were working on developing some pieces and then realized that what they were developing probably wasn't the best solution to develop, and so they delayed some things on the roadmap. They are still saying that a form solution is coming. Something is coming, but they have not given us any updates as to what is coming, so we really can't share any insider information. We don't have anything to share from that other than a solution is coming. And then the other things that they did say is that for SharePoint 2016, Infopath will move forward. So Infopath Form Services will be running on SharePoint 2016, which means that you can use Infopath 2013 to build forms that will go on SharePoint 2016. So that's kind of the summary of the story. So we don't have anything new and exciting to share beyond that. But what I would like to do is open it up to kind of everybody to talk about what their experiences have been over the last year of not having Infopath. What are they doing to solve forms? I think what I'd really like to do is start with Mark Anderson, because you kind of hit the nail on the head just a minute ago where you said, when we talk about forms, we first have to define what a form is. And I love listening to your perspective on that, because I think you define it and describe it very well. So I'd love to kind of get you to start on kind of your concept of what forms is, and then how things fit into this big picture, and what tools do we use as we're building out forms, and just, the different landscape that's there for you.
All right. Well, that's quite a build-up. I don't know if I can do that, but so to me, forms are the place where you type stuff into the computer. That's very, very simple, right? And I think a lot of people conflate a lot of different ideas with what that means, and in some cases it makes sense, and in some cases it doesn't. I don't think that forms are workflow. And I think people often put those two together as if one can't exist without the other. I think it's very appropriate to think of them as separate things. Sometimes we just need to fill in a piece of paper, and whether we put that piece of paper on the screen or we do it on a piece of paper, it's still a form. And then what happens to that data is a whole different thing. I think that one of the things that's gone on while everybody has been nestled in SharePoint land and using things like list forms and Infopath is that the world has gone way beyond what those tools do. And the SharePoint world has had these blinders on and sort of ignored what's going on out in the what I'll call the real world. And there are just incredible tools out there to build a lot of rich functionality that we can start to use in SharePoint. I can build a form out of whole cloth using a library like Angular or Knockout, or lots of third-party tools that are available. We have web services that we can use to talk to lists. Now, it depends on how you want to build things and what your requirements are. So I think a lot of the time when Microsoft is talking about forms, they're actually talking about something that's quite different than what a lot of their end users and customers are thinking. They tend to always put workflow and forms together. They make it this giant enchilada, and that enchilada is important, but the ingredients that are inside it are important too. So it's getting data into a system, being able to edit it, being able to delete it, the standard CRUD operations, and then it's having something happen to that data so that it can flow through a business process and get us to a good result and improve the performance of the organization and all that sort of stuff. So Infopath is still great at that. SharePoint list forms are still great at that. And the real question is, well, what do you need? It's not a one-size-fits-all thing. You can use either one of those, or Mark's application, or lots of third-party stuff. But the important thing is to know what it is you're trying to accomplish and solve that problem as opposed to the forms problem, which is this giant thing that's not really all that well defined. And I'll stop there.
No, it's great insight. Asif, are you still with us? I know this is one that you can tackle next, and then we'll take it to some others if you're with us.
Yeah, I'm still here. I think
Okay.
there you go. I think Dan is fixing my picture. I appreciate that, Dan. That's better than me live anyway. I like that better. All right. I apologize for that webcam issue, but so what I tell customers right now is if you are using Infopath, I'll talk about that specifically. If you are using it, just understand, somebody made a comment on the chat as well over here that the responsive design and the stuff that's coming up right now, that's not going to be answered with Infopath. That's number one. Number two, you might not want to use it for enterprise purposes for too long. If it's for team and group purposes, I think it's just fine because many of those solutions are not long-term anyway. But remember that there are caveats which have always been there in Infopath and they are not going away. There are no updates, there are no fixes, there are no bugs that will be squashed in Infopath. It will remain the same until 2023. That's the plan at least. So if you can live with that, live with it, enjoy it. A lot of technical solutions these days don't last for that long anyway. I don't think Infopath is all bad if you're already using it. Now, if you're just starting out with Infopath or with a form solution, then take a look at the vendors. Unfortunately, there is no clear story from Microsoft yet unless you're going the code route. So if you're not going the code route, you want to look for the no-code route. Definitely look into the vendors. They are awesome. There's lots of good solutions out there. Then the third is if you're evaluating a form solution, it's kind of like what Mark said, understand what is a form necessity first. And with that necessity, then go find the right solution for it, whether internal or outside of SharePoint. Forms don't have to be a SharePoint-specific form. It could be an outside form that integrates with SharePoint. That's fine, too. You have to remember that. Anyway, it's a mobile world. It's a responsive world, a responsive design world, so the regular tools won't cut it that easily. Understand your requirements, and I think talk to the right consultant, you'll be all good. Those are the word to proceed. That's my opinion.
Awesome.
Yeah, so just to jump on top of what both Mark and Asif are saying, first of all, I agree with what they're saying, right? What are your forms needs? I like to bash Infopath because it's fun and I enjoy it, and if I'm picking on something, then I'm going to pick on something like Infopath. And you can do a lot with the out-of-the-box SharePoint list forms. You can layer some client-side development on those and give those some extra functionality. But there are other options. And like I said, I had a lot of bad experiences with Infopath and clients who use Infopath. So I developed a forms tool. It's called Forms 7. You can find it at forms7.codeplex.com. It is a free tool. It's 100% client-side, so it uses it'll work in Office 365, it'll work in SharePoint 2010, it'll work in SharePoint 2007. So it's got a lot of flexibility there. And what Form 7 does is it allows you to create a form using standard HTML and JavaScript. So the bad thing about it is you still need to know some HTML and JavaScript. There is no drag and drop interface for it yet, although one may be coming. But you need to write HTML and JavaScript. But because of that, you can make the form look exactly how you want it to look. You can make it responsive. You can make it highly stylized. You can make it wizard-based. You can add all sorts of business logic. I have one client who's using it, who on one of their Form 7 fields has an employee ID. And when a user enters an employee ID, it calls a web service to populate the rest of the fields on the form with information about that user. So it gives you a lot of flexibility to do that. And the way Form 7 works on the underside, it's just a jQuery library. I actually use it with SP services right now. And it stores all of your form data that lives in that form into one field in a SharePoint list field. Just like Infopath stores all your form data in an XML file, I store all of your form data in one field. And then you can promote fields from your form to a SharePoint list just like you do in Infopath. So it's a step there. We're making a lot of improvements to it, and you're going to see a new release to that fairly soon with some very cool features like field level encryption is one of the big ones that's coming out. So you can start to encrypt pieces of your form and make those kind of read-only to your users.
Very
But yeah,
cool.
so check it out, form7.coplex.com, and yeah, and Jennifer's cutting me off, so I'll stop.
Oh, very cool, Mark. It's interesting when we listen to kind of everybody share. There's no real one answer. There's no prescriptive way to say do this, not that, especially when it comes to forms. And so one question that I would really love to pose to the group, and maybe we can take this as some different quick answers, some of the pros and cons of using forms, and when would you use a third-party tool over using Infopath. So maybe we can go around pretty quick, and let's start with, what are some of the pros for using Infopath? And I'm going to start above me with Dan, and maybe you can kind of give us some insight on, just a couple second click on what you think are the pros of using Infopath.
Dan, you're muted.
There aren't any.
There we go, that will work. I think there's a couple of pros. One is, obviously, if you're using Infopath currently, it's going to be supported for a very long time, and it won't change. Now, that's a negative in many cases, but in some cases, knowing something is not going to change for 6 years in technology is actually a pretty good thing. And so if you can build something that works, it's going to be stable for a very long time. Second, it's very cheap, especially if you're talking about doing Infopath against Office 365. Third, some of the simplest things you can do with Infopath is simply to make a SharePoint list form pretty. And that's something that a lot of people don't do with Infopath. It's super easy. You click the little button in the ribbon that says Customize with Infopath. You make the form pretty. And it's not necessarily going to be responsive, but it's going to be pretty. And that actually can do a lot for driving adoption, helping people understand what your form is meant to do. So those, I would say, would be some pros of Infopath.
Awesome. How about you, Mark Anderson? What is a pro of using Infopath?
Well, I'm going to come up with some sort of contrarian answer to this, right? There's no pro to using a particular piece of technology, right? There's a pro if it answers your requirements. So if like what Dan what he outlined, making a form prettier, if that is one of your goals, Infopath's a great answer for that, right? The fact that form services still support and will continue to support that kind of rich form means that you sort of have a native capability. You don't have to install something else on your server, so that's a good thing. Not that all of these other third-party things aren't reliable and robust. I think that some of them are very, very good, and I don't know that people are looking at things like, and you might have to help me with some of the names, Nintex Forms, K2 I think has something, Formatus has something. I'm not trying to plug anybody in particular, but there are 5 or 6 different companies that have stuff out there that may be better than Infopath, but Infopath still has a lot going for it.
I think when I look at what some of the pros are of using Infopath, it's kind of like Dan said, it's very rapid and quick development. I also think for a large subset of users, it's a pretty simple tool to use. Now, you have to say that in your limits, right? Like if you're doing something simple with it, it's a simple tool to use. You can also build ridiculous solutions inside of Infopath. So I'm not referring to those, but I am referring to, just being able to build a simple, maybe an intake form or something like that without any code. It's relatively simple to get in, drag and drop, point and click, get the things that you need, and get that published and make it very available very quickly. So those are some of the pros that I would think of. How about you, Asif?
Sure. There's some of the stuff you guys already mentioned, but there's a low barrier to entry in Infopath. If you already have SharePoint server, which most organizations do anyway, you can serve up the Infopath forms directly on your server. All you need is one license, which is $200 to start designing the form. And that's a pretty small investment for organization to start getting something out there. If you have nothing, something is much better than nothing. And small teams, regional-based solutions, small HR things and stuff like that, which are changing anyway, do a really good job taking this tool, understanding how to use it, branding, customizing. All these things are fairly simple to do to start up and then doing more stuff with it. And we also have to realize that there are many good third-party solutions out there, but they do, charge a lot of money for the solution. So if you have a need, for example, for a specific solution that provides digital signatures, for example, that's already built into Infopath. Make a quick one, enable digital signatures in it, have some sections that show up for some people, doesn't show up for other people, all that good stuff, and you're done. That's a very good solution to get going right now as you decide on what to do as for an enterprise solution. So anyway, rapid design, rapid forms, robust creation of forms and all that stuff is, I think, the major pro right now of Infopath, which is still alive and well and supported.
Awesome. Good feedback. I think Mark is getting ready to leave us and come back, so we'll kind of skip him for this one. Now let's go into the fun one.
Well, I can hear you, Jen.
What are some of the, I say fun because I think...
No, can you hear me? Don't skip me.
Okay, do you want to list your pros? Okay, I didn't know if you were there, so
sure, and I do,
as
much as I like to pick. I agree with all the comments that have been stated. I think that if you're using Infopath today, there's no reason to just stop using Infopath. Look, it works, keep using it, but keep in mind that you need to look for something else. And also, one of the best things about it is its price and that those business users can create forms. I think that's the best selling points for it. The biggest con I have with it is if your company is using Infopath, there's a great chance it's abusing it too. And you've got an IT staff who has to support a lot of the junk forms that have been created by where people throw everything and the kitchen sink in it and they become these unwieldy beasts. So that's my 2 cents.
Okay, let's talk about some of the cons. I think, Mark, we're going to kind of, you just did your cons. You just said that, you put the entire kitchen sink into a form. I kind of will enhance that. Like, I believe that, you take Infopath too far. Code behind forms is a great example. I don't think I've ever seen one of those in the wild actually work out well for everyone involved in the entire process. So I think that's one of the things. It's a tool that's almost, it's too easy to shoot your own foot with that one. So it's a tool that you can do so much with it, but you can almost do too much with it. So you can very easily get into realms that maybe shouldn't be completed within Infopath, which is, part of the reason that I think we're starting to see a change in tools. So how about you, Asif? What are some of your cons with working with forums?
Yeah. I'm almost having a deja vu moment because earlier in the panel, the other panel that we did earlier, we talked about SharePoint Designer, and I mentioned that it came from the product front page, which was never truly designed for SharePoint, and it became SharePoint Designer, and then it supported SharePoint. It's the same thing for Infopath, actually, because Infopath was not a SharePoint tool, if you guys remember. In 2003, when it was first introduced, there was no SharePoint hook to it at all. I don't think so, at least, until 2007. So it was a tool that, just like I think Jen and Mark, you guys both mentioned, people take it too far with what they need to do with their SharePoint forms requirements. And it has its limits. For anonymous enabled forms, for mobile forms, for many of these things, which was never truly built for, it has its limits. And Microsoft, has stopped really enhancing it since 2010, really. So that's the con, I believe, that I believe many people have started using it for the wrong reasons. Still, it's a great tool if you use it for the right reason, but those reasons are getting less and less, unfortunately.
Awesome. How about you, Dan? What are some of your cons in this world of forums?
I think the first con I'll mention is the pro that I mentioned earlier, which is it's never going to change. Things that it doesn't do well now, it's never going to do well. It will never be responsive. It will never integrate with the managed metadata service. It will never support any kind of encryption of the field. So, it's that technology. And so as a technology, if you want to have something to grow with you over time, it's definitely not the right
Okay. How about you, Mark Anderson?
So you want cons for Infopath, huh?
Yeah.
Well, I don't ever use it, and maybe that's sort of why I think there's a con. I mean, to me, it's sort of like using Visual Studio to write JavaScript. It's overkill. It's way too big a sledgehammer, and I think that for what a lot of people want to do with forms, and yes, I'm using air quotes, it may just be that they want the labels to be purple instead of black, and it's just too much. So I find that I can accomplish a lot more with CSS and a little JavaScript on the list forms than
Yeah,
well, not
but
more,
you speak in the language of
Kinda
syntax
awkward.
and semicolons, so it's different audiences too.
It absolutely is different audiences, but I don't think that Infopath is what a lot of what it's been called for a long time, which is an end user tool. I think it's a very specialized set of knowledge, and so there's a learning curve there. And the truth be told, the tools that we have to build things like forms are so much better than they were when Infopath came out. And I mean tools like web development tools, where we really can just drag and drop some fields onto a page and then wire it up to a web service on the back. So going to a developer to do that and make it exactly the way you want it can sometimes be a better answer than trying to sort of navigate through this not really an end user kind of tool. And that's where you get some of the really hideous stuff, I think.
Yeah, that's a very, very good point, Mark. So the question I'd like to pose to everyone on the panel now is, let's say you have a clean slate. You have no forms technology anywhere in your organization. You are starting completely clean, and you need to start building forms. What approach do you take in selecting the tools that you use, even if you're going to use a multiple set of tools? But what approach would you take to looking at and selecting those tools? And I think I'll start with Mark Rackley if he is still with us.
I am still with you. So I think you have to look, the two biggest factors I would look at are budget and what kind of team do you have, right? Do you have, if you have a lot of budget, then look for some of the more extensive tools like Nintex or K2, because they have a very robust user interface so that non-technical staff can create forms. Or do you not have much of a budget at all, but you have a technical staff that can, write HTML and JavaScript or are comfortable in there? Then you can look at doing things like customizing the out-of-the-box list forms, or look at something free like Form 7 to get you going. So I think, the biggest things are budget and skill set, and then from there, see where your comfort lies.
Awesome. How about you, Dan? What do you think about this? Oh, I think you need to unmute yourself.
All right. Yeah, I agree with what both Marks have said and posted, and that is it's first and foremost a question of skills match. Even when you start looking at third-party tools, many people will talk about a difference between K2 and Nintex, for example, that boils down to a skill set alignment and a decision about who's going to be actually using the tool set. So you do need to know that. You also need, I think, to take into strong consideration what is going to be a long-term play for you. And while, Infopath might be a short-term play, it's probably not going to be a long-term play, and you might be wanting to start looking at which tools are going to serve you over the long term.
Awesome. Yeah, so I'll give my answer. When I'm looking at it, I agree with what everybody has said so far, right? You have to look at time, money, budget, all of these different pieces. And then look at, the level of effort is really what I try to do. So I try to look at solutions. So a lot of the people that I work with are in smaller organizations that don't have a lot of budget, don't have a lot of pieces. So I like to first say, can I solve this out of the box with SharePoint lists and libraries? Can it get me far enough to what I need? If I can't, can I use Access Services? Access Services gets a little bit interesting because it's a good tool, but it's also, when we talk about forms, I know, Mark made a very good point that forms are different than workflow. and they're two different components, but a lot of times they kind of come together. So a lot of times people are building a form so that they can then attach a workflow with it. And inside of Access Services, I look to see if I can do it. And some of the big questions with Access Services are, can everyone have the same permissions to the entire table? Because Access doesn't allow you to do itemized permissions. And do I need workflows? And if I need either one of those, then I know Access Services isn't going to work for me. And if that's the case and I need that, then I'm going to start looking at, am I going to use Infopath, or am I going to go out and build other solutions? And a lot of it is I look at the life of the form. If it's going to be a short-lived form that's maybe not even an enterprise-wide form but something simple and quick, then I'm going to just go ahead and put it inside of Infopath and build it out. If I'm building, let's say, a new HR onboarding system and the company's going to use it for the next 2 to 3 years to get everyone onboarded and in the system, I am certainly going to start working with developers and probably avoid Infopath at that point, just so that I can go ahead and do that. So those are some of the types of things that I look at when I'm trying to decide what I'm doing with a clean slate. So, Dan. Yes, sir.
I'll add one more thing, which is the sort of elephant in the room, which is something we mentioned earlier, and that is that Microsoft is coming out with a solution. So I think one of the things that organizations need to look at is Microsoft is going to come out with something. It's probably going to be somewhere in the near term, let's say a year and a max, probably shorter than that. So at least start telegraphing what their solution is, probably much sooner than that. And so if I'm an organization and I've got a list of major projects I'm trying to tackle, and one of them is heavy forms and several of them aren't, it's possible I might try to prioritize the one that's heavy forms down so that I can align it more with Microsoft timing and have a better understanding of what the out-of-box solution is going to be. So that's another alternative, just to wait and get by with a minimum solution that meets your needs now until we really do know what Microsoft is going to deliver.
Right.
A lot of this comes down to sort of the skills of triage that Jen was just going through, right? It's not, somebody wants a form, so we have to use the tool that we have. It should be, well, what is the problem? How long, like Jen was saying, how long is the form going to be around? How complex is it? How good does it have to look? If it's a very utilitarian thing that people aren't going to use very often, then don't spend any time on it. So I think that whole triage effort and having a good decision tree and understanding what your portfolio of options is, if you happen to have Nintex Forms, if you have Infopath, if you have list forms, that's 3 great options that will probably address a high 90% of your needs, and you're fine, or whatever the mix is in your organization. And so the sort of like, do I have to use Infopath? Do I have to use list forms? I think is the wrong way to think about it. You have a bunch of options, at least those 2, maybe Access Services is one that everybody has as well. And so pick the one that actually matches what you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, again, I'll say one more thing too that sort of goes along with that, and that is, I as a consultant have seen a lot of customers decide that they were going to build a major business process automation capability, like let's say HR onboarding that Jeff mentioned earlier, and they invest all this money into developers and tools to ramp it up without really understanding what the problem is. And in some cases, I've seen more successful implementations be much more agile, where they took baby steps and maybe even used tools that they knew they were going to throw away. They used Excel, they used Infopath, whatever. They use little things just to prototype and massage and figure out what the real business problem is and how it moves through the system before they invested huge amounts of money in a development effort to solve the problem. I often find that can be a better solution if the organization is ready for that.
Yeah, speaking to that, Dan, I used to, when I was doing a lot of consulting and I was going through, I'd encourage people when they say that they had this form and they needed workflows associated with it. I would say, okay, let's go to a whiteboard, and can you map out for me what this form needs to look like? And can you then map out exactly what the business process needs to look like? And if they couldn't, what I said to them is, you guys are a great example for we need to start small. We need to actually see what works before we spend any development dollars. And so maybe we're only going to build you 40 to 50% of your solution, but you need to start using that so you can define what the other pieces are, because people can spin in circles. The only thing that Infopath and workflows do when you throw it at a bad process or help identify how bad the process is. And so it's an interesting thing. It's how quickly you guys can do all of those different things, but you've got to have really good processes and really well-defined things before you make an investment to build out all of these super complete solutions. Austin,
Yeah, I see
are you
that.
still with us?
I'm still here.
Awesome.
I
You
want
want
to.
to kind of add your thoughts into this,
Yeah.
Nick?
Absolutely. I'll just add my opinion. I think you guys have given all the good answers, though, but I'll just add on to it. My usual question to the customer or to somebody that I'm mentoring, don't look at the initial budget. If you look at the initial budget, I'm sorry, but that's going to get you in trouble, because the initial budget says don't buy something from outside, build it. Whenever you build something, you got to maintain it, and you got to look at that maintenance cost for human resource and for just the understanding of the whole product the way it is right now and the way it's going in the future. Unless you can maintain that, go get a solution from outside, especially for forms. I've seen customers who have hooked their organization to other companies which provide form solutions do a lot better than the ones who are building it from scratch completely. That's just been what my experience has been from what I've seen. Things are changing too quickly in this space, and the vendors have a good inside look at where Microsoft is and where they're going, and it's in their best interest, of course, to keep up with it. So look at the whole solution. I'm not saying, and I'm not affiliated, by the way, with any vendors out there, the Nintex, the K2, and all that stuff, but many of them have really good solutions. Look into that. Look at the total cost of total ROI before you start building your own.
Really good point. Mark, did you want to add something?
I was just going to say, I think, you
No,
know, what
I don't have
I
anything to
see
add.
the same, a little. We got 2 marks. I see a little bit of the same thing that you were talking about with sort of the clarity around forms with workflow, even to a higher degree. You know, people say we have to automate this process, we need a workflow, and then you say, okay, well, what's step 1 of the process? Yeah, that's that silence that comes next, right? So I think the same thing happens with forms. Our forms need to look really good. Okay, well, what does that mean? Well, you know, like, good. That's not a thing, right? So you have to define what these things are, the things that you're trying to accomplish. And Jen, I think that you run into a lot of the same stuff. You know, it's like there's this lofty concept of forms, but the specifics are the only way it's going to actually happen. So this group has had this conversation together many times about forms over the last couple of years, and you know we talk about, well, where is it going and what's going to happen next, and it's always this sort of high level thing. And you know, I think what we really have to focus on is what's the problem we're trying to solve, and how can we solve it best with the information we have at this time now, right? Infopath will be the right answer for some of that. Something else might be the answer for another piece of that. And next month or next year, when Microsoft has done something different, we'll have a different answer. So we need to just sort of deal with reality instead of thinking it's all going to come someday and we have to wait for that.
Yeah, that's a great question, and it almost leads into one of the ones that's in the chat room right now, and that's, you know, if we decide to go with a third-party tool, what about roadmap compatibility? And how do we best plan and prepare for, I'm going with this third-party tool? We have all seen it. We have all seen, you know, Microsoft has no solution, so we're going with third-party, and then boom, here's the way that Microsoft is going to have us do it. So looking at that and knowing that's kind of the history, what advice can we give people to say, all right, guys, if we choose to go with a third party, how do we stay connected to the roadmap and know what's coming next. Anyone want to jump in on that one?
I'll take that one.
So I'll jump in on that first.
I think, first of all,
simply,
All right, we'll go with Dan first.
Okay. I think the third parties, the big ones, have a very vested interest in not only providing a solution that is aligned with Microsoft's roadmap, but also one that extends their capabilities. They will always be ahead of Microsoft as far as feature set, otherwise they will be out of business. And so you look at what each of these companies are doing, and they are both well beyond just being, I shouldn't say, if you look at the two big players, K2 and Nintex, of course there's AlphaPoint and others as well. If you look at them, they're all much more than just a form solution now. They're developing things that extend even outside of that basic core scenario that we're talking about. So I think that investment with one of the quality partners is always going to be a good investment. So my feeling with customers is if the customers can be serious about business process automation and/or forms, and the latter is part of the former, they really need to very seriously consider investing.
Rackley, do you have anything to add to that?
yeah, so I agree with everything that Dan said, and I think that when you look at those vendors, they are going to want to try to stay on Microsoft's roadmap, which is a good thing. But again, I also want to throw a pitch for my tool I'm creating here, because one of the good things about Form 7 is that it's not storing data in any proprietary way, and it's not creating forms with any proprietary method. It's storing your data as a JSON object, and it's your form as HTML. So you're in a good place for what comes next, because you can get to your data, you can get to your form, and you can take that to whatever's next with little effort and no dependency on the tool set to get to your data or the form. So think about that. How hard is it going to be to get your data in your form and do something with it when you decide to take it someplace else?
Yeah, I think Corey brought up a really good point in the chat window, and he was saying that, a lot of these major form players, the forms are their bread and butter. So they are going to do everything they can in the long haul to make all of this compatible. If, let's take, Nintex and K2 just for an example, because those are the two big names that everybody really knows. If the new feature, rolls out to Office 365, they are heavily invested to making sure that their product still works and is on top of it. So I think that, some of these players, that are trusted, especially ones that you look at their certifications with Microsoft and what levels of partnership that they have, you're going to be able to go in and go in with a little bit of assurance and understanding of how they're staying on top of it. It's also something when you go through the sales process to really learn the company that you're working with and ask them, how are they staying on top of the roadmap? What are they doing with the different pieces to know what's happening? So those are questions that any vendor across any solution right now should be answering when it comes to Office 365. All right. Awesome. So let's talk about access services, because that's one of the major things that's a player there right now is access services. So Asif, I know you've spent a lot of time and you actually do a lot of sessions. On access. So do you kind of want to give us an overview of how does access services fit into this form story?
Sure, I'll get you guys started. I'll talk about what I like about it first.
Sure.
So access has been that child that has been forgotten for a long time by Microsoft, I felt. And then a child that we started using in the beginning, and then many of us kind of put it aside saying, nah, it's not good enough in scalability for what we want to do, and we went to SQL. But now it's making a comeback in a big way. At least it has been. Let's see what happens in the next version. Not just access the product itself, but access components and access services, as you mentioned, are pretty well embedded within the SharePoint product, the SharePoint 2013 product specifically. What I like about access services and access web apps specifically You can make a web application directly using Access 2013. The great thing about the current version is when you make it, you need Access 2013, the product, just one copy of it. But when you deploy it, it goes to SharePoint, either SharePoint Online or on-premises. So the interface is completely in SharePoint. Any user can use it. They don't need any licensing specifically for that, as long as they have access to that site. Now, the best part about the whole story is that data integrity is kept way beyond what Access can handle because the data resides in SQL databases. Every web app has a new database instantiated for it in the back end, whether it's in the cloud or it's on premises. And that makes the whole story much stronger on the back end, which I think has been lacking. So that's all the good news about Access Services in my opinion. There's more as well, but I'll stop here for this one. Now, a few things that people should also understand about Access Services and Access Web Apps specifically is it's not completely there yet. So there's no workflow support for it. The design mechanisms of what you can do with it is kind of finicky. It's not that great. The data access of how you can get data from other sources is just, it's not that great. You can do some stuff, but not much. So it still has some ways to go, actually a long ways to go, but it's good for light web apps right now as it stands. I'll stop here.
Yep. Dan, do you have any closing thoughts on Access or anything you want to kind of add to the Access story? Oops, you're muted though.
Man, I've been having a bad habit with that this time. No, I think it's been covered very well. I wonder personally, as I look at Access as a technology, it's been the tool that would never die. I think if you had asked people in 2002 what the future of Access was, they would have said 0. And somehow here we are 13 years later still talking about it. Microsoft has kept extending the tool's life by giving it new capabilities and running it as a service. But when I look at where Microsoft's going now, I don't see how Access can fit into that because it's built on a set of code that never envisioned mobile or cloud. So, if I were Microsoft, I would be looking at turning it out completely and replacing the things we do with Access with modern tool sets rather than something that was built in the 1990s.
That's a very good point, Dan, and I could completely see that happening. So, all right, guys, we have got 10 minutes left. I didn't see any other questions coming through the panel yet, so I want to open it up to our panelists as to things that you kind of want to cover in the forums. I know, Asif, you are so passionate about forums, and I love spending time chatting with you about all of it. I tease you to no end because you get so passionate about it. But have we covered all of the messages that you kind of wanted to deliver as part of this panel? Are there any other words of wisdom you'd like to leave the crowd with?
I don't think I'm in that stature to have words of wisdom specifically, but I can tell you what I tell people. I think people get too excited or too scared when things happen. Oh, SharePoint on-premises is going away, Infopath is going away, SharePoint Designer is going away, what's going to happen? Honestly, all these things are just tools. Okay, we have many, many, many tools. That doesn't mean that you use all of them or use none of them. Use the ones that make sense to you for your business. Forget about tools, is my thought. Look at what your business goals are. SharePoint and those tools can do everything if you really want to do everything. But that doesn't mean that you use it for everything. So forms, workflows, everything, use it to what your business needs. Don't get in the hype. I'm not saying there's any of these tools are bad, but you need to understand what is best for your business, not which tool looks the coolest. That's my thought.
Very cool. Very, very, very good words of wisdom. And now I get to ask Anderson, Mark Anderson, what are your words of wisdom when it comes to forms?
Well, I typed it in the chat window. Don't panic. You know, I think because we live in this world now where we have so much information coming at us all the time, we never used to know what vendors were doing, right? We didn't panic about that. We just waited until we heard about something and then we thought about it. So I think people are always trying to divine in the tea leaves. You know, what is Microsoft doing? What's coming up next? Why did this happen? You know, Sonia said something at lunch and I think it means that, no, it doesn't really mean anything. It just means she said something at lunch. So, you know, I do think it's a don't panic thing. Solve today's problems. Make sure that you're serving your users and doing good work for them, getting them to do, you know, helping them to do their jobs better. Let all this other stuff just sort of go by, you know, and deal with it as it happens instead of what you think might happen.
Oh, exactly. How about you, Mr. Rackley? What are your words of wisdom?
So I just kind of have to echo everybody else is saying, you know, don't panic. Things are changing really quickly right now with the new Microsoft. The way I say it a lot is, you know, making sausage is messy, and we're looking at the sausage being made right now. So it's not always the prettiest, cleanest product, but in the end, it'll be pretty good. So just put some research into it. Look at what your business goals are. Look at your skill sets. Look at, you know, where you want to be 2 years from now, and just kind of prepare yourself as best you can, and then go download Form 7 because it's free and use it.
All right, Dan, what are your words of wisdom?
Mark, I don't know if anyone knows what tool you have written. What's it called again? Form something? I really like what
under a rename.
It is, and hopefully it will land somewhere near and dear to my heart. So absolutely, it is a great tool. It's keeping Mark. And for those of you who don't know, our day, we all need Mark. That's what we do, and he's a good sport for putting up with it. I really like what Mark Anderson said, and I will reflect that. You know, this is a, you know, we've been told these tools are, and we can tell that many of these tools are reaching end of life. But they're going to be supported for 7 years if they come from Microsoft, maybe even 9 years. So by the time we get 9 years from now, we are not going to be using these things. We're not going to be using these things. Our entire world is going to be different. So to worry about the fact that a tool is going to be gone in 7 years is just really kind of silly. Instead, focus on understanding what you're trying to achieve. As a consultant, I can tell you what you pay me money for. You pay me to help you figure out what your business process actually is. It has far less to do with the actual technology and developing a solution than it is to actually stop, take a breath, and say, what are we doing? How is it done right now? How do we want it to be done in the future? That is the golden egg. So focus on that and not on the tool. And once you've done that, the tool decision will be easy. Because you'll understand what the benefits of the business process is, or the form. You'll understand what the risks are. You'll understand what the costs are, and you'll be able to make an intelligent decision that balances those two things.
I love it. So closing kind of with my words of wisdom, it's an echo of what everyone said. The other thing I'd like to say is not only don't panic, who cares? If I build a solution and I choose to use a team site versus a group, if I choose to use an Infopath form versus something with Form 7, at the end of the day, it probably doesn't matter what solution I used for that if I solve the business problem.
And I'd like to say on behalf of my community, a huge thanks to Jen for all the work to put this together. She's heading out on vacation tomorrow, well deserved. Thank you so much. We'll see all of you tomorrow. Bye, everybody.
Bye, guys.